All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome everybody to our Neo4j Live today, MCP for LLM Agents, APIs, and graphs. So I'm very happy to host you and to have this session today. I see lots of chatter in the chat already. So hi Rob, hi Dirk, hi Tim. Yeah, it's great to have you. Hi Michael, for joining already. It's great to have you join us and talk a little bit about MCP, LLMs, and why context matters and why it specifically matters with when working with MCP and with an AI system. But first of all, how are you doing today?
I'm good. The sun is shining. It was a little bit cold this morning, but now it's sun came out. Our pet rat died today, so that's really sad. So family is a little bit devastated. Let's see. Otherwise, I mean, there's so much happening in the space. It's insane. I'm not sure how you folks are catching up with all the things. Let us know in the chat as well. What's your trick to stay on top of things? My trick is having ADHD. Actually, that helps a lot.
For somebody without that, would be interesting to know how you get.
Exactly. What do other people do? I don't know. And MCP is really exciting, right? So I mean, Alex, I don't know if you remember that we did this. I think we did a live stream also back in December or so when we wrote the first MCP server for Neo4j with Claude.
Yeah.
Or at least I did the blog post, but I think we also did a live stream about it.
You did a blog post. We talked about it in our new Aura Discover Aura session.
Exactly.
We did a live demo a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how things are evolving there, right? In the beginning, there was not so much uptake, and then suddenly in, let's say, February, it exploded, and now all the big providers are jumping on the ship as well, including AWS, Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and everyone. And I also have to say, I'm really impressed by just the amount, tens of thousands of MCP servers being written by everyone, and also the kind of interactions that you have when you have these tool enables in your AI assistant or in your IDE. It feels really like a little bit of a new paradigm of interacting with all these APIs and data sources and so on. So I'm also curious what experiences everyone else has made. So please ask your questions or share your experiences in the chat as well. I'm really curious of learning more, or if you want to connect later, feel free also to drop me an email at michael@neo4j.com. Happy to chat about if you have like experiences with graphs and MCP or MCP in general. Happy to dive deeper into that as well.
Yeah. I remember. I think you had this blog post written about what is MCP, and in parallel, somebody else wrote this MCP and security issue blog. I think that was early April, so basically a month ago, a month and a half ago or something. And then it was the first kind of like happening, and then I can only read. I will read what Roos is just putting in chat, and Roos says MCP has taken over as the leading standard for tool interoperability. Like it or not, and despite its glaring gaps in terms of security, that was this other post I've read. Maybe Roos also has read it. It's clearly something people need to support, and it's becoming almost within. We can look at it, and it's becoming a standard. Kind
of an industry standard, right? Not like
exactly.
Not just in committee standard, but more like a ground up industry standard. It feels a little bit like GraphQL felt back then in 2016 when Facebook released GraphQL as an open source with like, working groups and like a specification, reference implementations, lots of people contributing. So I feel reminded of the time back then when we also did the first GraphQL integration for Neo4j in 2016. And as one of the first databases actually. And so it feels like the same vibes in
Yeah. I mean, it's great on one side that it evolves and that it really everybody flocks to it and everybody sees, okay, this is cool. This gives me great opportunity. This is a great mechanism I want to support. But on the other side, it's already it's almost a little bit scary how quick it goes. And then all because of security, I think it's like, okay, you you cannot skip this part. I mean, it's boring and it is not as exciting, but it is still,
Yeah,
if you
definitely.
leave it out too long, it's probably creating issues.
Yeah, I think two things. So those of you that have not listened to the Latent Space podcast on MCP, that was actually really good one. I'll send the link. We sent a link in the channel as well. Because it was with the founders or with the creators of MCP. Alex, I'll send you the link so you can share. 1 second. Just need to find between all these windows. I'll send it to you here in the chat.
Yeah, perfect.
And so that was really interesting, also seeing kind of how they first internally at Anthropic built it out and what the uptake was and the interest, but also like some of their thinking behind it as well. And I think they were definitely overwhelmed by the impact that it has now, right? So I think it was like just the two people that used to work in open source before, but that have basically been definitely overwhelmed by the success. But I think also with like all the other big players like Google and Amazon or AWS, Microsoft and so on, coming onto the train for MCP, there's this clear kind of requirements of, security permissions, access control, safety, validation, and all the other things. And that's very, like everyone is coming together as well from that perspective, kind of everyone brings their own perspective, right? Where Anthropic is more like on the model and the LLM side, and like people like Google and AWS are more focused on the security, and Microsoft are focused more on the security aspects as well, and interoperability as well, right? And then, so I think many of these kind of questions will be addressed in the next few months, and we're currently still in the exploration phase for MCP, and I think that's where we see a lot of energy and a lot of ideas. And as long as people then contribute to the spec and to the reference implementations, also all the people that wrote those security blog posts, right? So if they're not just complaining but actually contributing, then they can help addressing it as well, right? So it doesn't need to stay at I found these issues or I reported on these issues. It's something that they can actually actively do something about it as well, right? Yeah, so really exciting times in the open source space on MCP as such. But yeah, I guess let's get to it. So unfortunately, our friend Zach can't join today. So we pre-recorded the session, but Alex and I am here. We are happy to answer questions afterwards as well. And actually, there's something on Discord going on as well, right, Alex?
Yeah, so we exactly. So we had recorded this next bit, but we are here. So keep the chat going. We will answer questions in chat. We will answer questions afterwards as well. So this still the same format. Try to keep it interactive, and we will drop to the Discord watch party afterwards. So if you are on Discord, if you're part of our Discord community there, you can watch live and join the watch party. But also Michael and I will drop in for a couple of minutes after this session and to answer some more questions in chat there, or rather with voice on. So if you want to hang out a little bit and talk, you can come over to that. I'll share the link to our Discord server in the chat in a little bit. But yeah, I think without further ado, let's get into it. Awesome. Enjoy, everybody, and we'll see you on the other side, I guess.
Cool. Let's go.
Awesome. So very excited, Michael and I, to speak to you about Model Context Protocol today. We have a pretty packed agenda. So I'm going to start. I'll go over some background context around AI and agents and a little bit of an overview of MCP. Then we'll get into the meat of the content with a lot of demos. Michael Hunger will lead that, talk about data services and APIs and Agent SDKs and just using MCP in general. And then we will end with some resources after that. So getting started with the background context. To understand MCP, it's very important to understand agent architectures and some of the challenges that we face with them in recent years or months, I should say, given how fast everything's going. So what is an agent really, right? And when you think about it, and a lot of this is overview for many of the folks here, but agents are really just applications that leverage AI models to think and act towards goals. So they have some amount of reasoning that they can apply to plan and determine different steps dynamically. And they can use that to help you automate complex workflows. So instead of like a very simple RAG architecture where you just have one step where you're pulling data like in a chain, you can now do different steps, different types of tools that you can invoke, whether it be APIs or querying data or taking other actions that you can put together in a thoughtful manner. And these agent architectures involve multiple components, right? You have your models, obviously. So like your large language models that you would get from Gemini or OpenAI or Bedrock or any of these places. You have your tools, which are going to be things for fetching data, performing actions, calling APIs, and so forth. They can even be other agents, right, in a multi-agent framework. You have your orchestration, which is your framework where you set up your short and long-term memory, where you have your instructions and your prompts and things of that nature. And all of this exists within inside of the agent runtime, right? And so we end up bundling a lot of things inside of these agent applications. And so where we end up running into a couple challenges is the fact that if you look at these tools, and this applies to things like memory as well, you end up with a lack of standards and sort of like a monolithic architecture, because there's basically all these different tools and different frameworks and things that you're bundling inside of one application. And this leads to these issues where you have these complex many-to-many vendor integrations because there's no standard. So you have all these different APIs and servers and client tools that you're trying to integrate. And that can lead to poor reusability, difficulty scaling different tool offerings, and ultimately lower quality agents, because it becomes very difficult, right, to maintain things and find the right tool to connect to the right agent quickly. And so the solution that comes into play is Model Context Protocol, which is really very simple, right, in concept. It's an open source protocol that standardizes how applications provide context to LLMs. And a useful analogy is to think of it sort of like a USB-C port, right? So just like you can use your computer and a USB-C port to connect to all sorts of different components and things, right, like screen sharing and monitors and such, Model Context Protocol is just a standardized way to connect AI to different data sources and tools, the context that it needs. And we've seen this pick up with very broad adoption this year, right? We've seen a lot of people across major, everything from major cloud platforms to open source frameworks adopting this protocol to really make tools more accessible. And MCP really follows a client-server architecture. So we'll go over this in a lot more depth later as we sort of move through our discussion here. But basically, right, there's a host MCP client, which is going to be sort of your Claude or your IDE or your sort of user-facing tool that's going to talk to MCP servers through a client that exists within inside of that host. And that in turn connects to data sources. So it's this very modular, composable framework, which means that you have reusable and independent components that are federated on the client side. It means that your tools are now shareable and reusable. They're discoverable. You can put them in registries and marketplaces. There's security and isolation. There's some caveats around this, right? But the idea is that within inside of each server, which offers an independent tool or service, you sort of have sort of a secure, isolated kind of component there to make sure that only the necessary context is shared and there's, privacy and safety within that. And then all of this leads to rapid innovation, developer uptake now, because it's easy to swap in and out components. We have this standard protocol. There's a lower barrier to entry, and this all fuels ecosystem growth and collaboration. And so just to talk about sort of the client server side architectures in a little bit more detail before I hand it off, right? There's sort of two big key components, right? There's the client, which interacts with the host, right? It's really on the host. And that can be used to interact with servers, which really offer the capabilities. And there's a stateful, persistent, bidirectional connection between the two. And this is from Anthropic. And there's a few different sort of categories of offerings that we think about. So there's tools, right, which are model controlled functions. So these are going to be things like for retrieval and search, sending messages, updating database records. There's resources that can be queried. So these are things that are application controlled, data being exposed directly to an application. So files, database records, API responses. And then there's prompts, which are user control, which are predefined templates for AI interaction. So for like document Q&A, transcript summarization, and handling JSON. And MCP hosts are, you can think of them kind of like the developer tools. So these are going to be things like VS Code, Cursor, Windsurf. They can also be, right, if you're developing, as we'll see later, your own agent inside of code. It can be sort of your own agent runtime that you build. And in the future, we'll see many more different types of MCP hosts pop up as part of agentic applications. And as I mentioned before, we're seeing a large development uptake in terms of MCP kind of getting picked up. And we see this in registries and marketplaces. So there's all these places that you can go, a few of the websites listed here, where you can get different MCP tools and services that are just there as servers that you can integrate into your workflows today. But what we'll be focusing on specifically to help you get started and really get a good understanding of MCP so you can get started with your journey with it are 3 different areas. So one is going to be data services. So how do you integrate data and connect your data to AI? Infrastructure APIs for controlling, spinning up and down resources, and also working with MCP inside of code. So inside of an agent development kit, so that you can integrate it when building your own agents. And so with that in mind, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Michael, who will start with data services for MCP, with MCP rather.
Thank you, Zach. Yes, so that's the first step, right? So you want to, similar to an RAG architecture, you want to make your data available that sits in your database and that you have personally access to your AI assistant or IDE, so that you can make use of this data in your conversation and so on. So to allow this, we basically connect the MCP host that Zach mentioned through the MCP client to the MCP server. So usually these servers are configured. In the MCP host, there are different types of transports, standard I/O transport where the server is running locally, or HTTPS transport when the server is a hosted server. And in our case, if we access Neo4j as a database where we want to do a graphrag on a knowledge graph, there we have tools like give me the schema of the database or execute Cypher on this. And then the MCP client uses the LLM both to extract information from the conversation, but also to select tools, take the response from the tool calls, and then integrate it or prepare it for the end user again, or even do multiple tool calls in a row to, for instance, get more details on a specific piece of information, or for instance, if a generated query ran into an error, then the LLM goes ahead and does another attempt at it and tries multiple different invocations as well. So that's the overall architecture, what this looks like. And actually, to implement an MCP server, it's actually not very hard. So you basically build a bunch of functions that you want to expose as MCP tools. Here we use fast MCP in Python, but there are also SDKs for other languages like JavaScript, Java, Go, Rust, and .NET and others. And then you have these tools here that I defined as Python functions. You see here these functions. And I have, for instance, a function write Cypher, so it executes a write statement in Cypher. And then I register all these tools, and then I just start my MCP server, which takes the credentials via environment variables or parameters as such. And then when we have our server running, we can test it out from different tools. We will mainly use Claude, but I want to show you something really nice. From Anthropic, there's actually a tool called Inspector. And you can start it with npx, so basically run and start the tool. And if you look at this, then npx looks like this. We have the MCP inspector here. And we can see basically we could configure our tool. Here, our tool is MCP Neo4j Cypher. I configured in the environment variables the connection to Neo4j down here with username, password, and connection URL. And then I connected. And then I looked at my tools. I can call list tools. So if I clear this again, I can call list tools. I see my tools. Here, see get Neo4j schema, which I can execute as a tool. Then it fetches the schema of the database as such, but we can also execute in read statements. So for instance, if I want to type just something simple, match and return count star, so which gives me the number of nodes in my database. Then I get 1148 or 4 nodes in my database. Right. And this is what we can now use in our LLM tool, in this case Claude, to import the data. As a database, I imported, basically I took an Aura database and imported just Northwind as a dataset. So you have basically a Neo4j data importer either from Postgres or from CSV files. You can basically import a number of nodes and relationships as such, and I imported the Northwind dataset here. So I have in my database here, categories, products, suppliers, customers, and so on, with all the relationships in there as such, which we want to interact with from our MCP tool. So I configured in Claude desktop my tools, and the latest version of Claude, you have actually a new UI that shows you the configured MCP tools. And for this Neo4j retail tool, we have these 3 tools that I just showed you available as tools. You can also enable and disable tools individually if you want to, such. So if I now start talking to Claude, I want to see which categories of products are in my retail database. So it will go ahead and use the MCP tool. So it basically has all the tools available, and then basically the LLM extracts the information from my question, also extracts parameters from my question. And so it asks me, can I execute a Cipher tool? And then I can allow this or deny it as I want. And it basically gives me the option. So it didn't get the right information. So at first it realizes it should actually fetch the schema first, so that it knows actually what's in the database and what is the structure of the database, which it also comments on. And then it writes a query again, runs this, and sees these categories, right? Can we see the volume of orders per category? So we can basically let it run a query that computes the basically number of orders per category, per product category, gets the total orders, and then basically it gives me like a table of this information. And I can also, I want this as a chart, right? So, and then based on this, it generates some React code basically to generate this, render this as a simple interactive chart as such, right? So I can basically see my categories and use this information as such, right? Just as a quick teaser, what I can also do, because I'm a developer, I can also say, can you generate a GraphQL type definition for the schema of the database? So, right, so then I can already hint at this, how as a developer I can make use of this interaction by basically having it generate files for me that I can use in my application, right? Or I could even say, can you use this file and run queries from my actual project code against this database to test it out, for instance, or to generate test data or things like that, right? So, and then basically it generated and GraphQL type definition here for me. So that's basically what you can do. And what's really interesting, if you have multiple databases configured, then you can basically combine them as well. You can also ask more complex questions where it needs to do multiple queries, and the results from the first query feed into the second query. So for instance, I can now also say, basically I can refer back to one of the categories, even in a misspelled way, and say, give me more details about this category, for instance. And then it looks into the context that it had from the interaction and uses that and fixes my misspellings or my partial names as such, right? So because it knows also what are the category IDs here, for instance, right? So that's for the first, the data interaction piece, right? So you can also have other things like heat maps or other things generated from that. One other really nice example on the data services side is you can also use databases, especially graph databases, as contextual memory for your LLM application. So for instance, here I had Claude think through climate change and impact of climate change and what we can do to address this, taking humankind's nature and the main society into account, and then basically told it, can you store this as memory? And then it goes ahead and uses our MCP server to store this as facts in different types of memories, which are connected to each other as well, right? So then you can basically also capture more complex information, and this memory is then always available to the LLM later in a later session. If you want to access this will always be available, and it can make use of that as well. Okay, the next step is infrastructure APIs with MCP, which is also really interesting for me as a developer, because as you know, there's many infrastructure APIs and CLIs and UIs and tools. And whenever I need to interact with one of these APIs or tools, I need to step out of my IDE. I have to go to an CLI or to an API or to an UI, fill in parameters or fields or things like that, have to log in and all the other things. But actually, I don't want to leave my IDE. I want this all being available from my AI-assisted IDE like Windsurf or Cursor or VS Code. And MCP enables this, right? So because MCP as concept can also wrap infrastructure APIs, which is really interesting, right? So I basically can say, I can connect Cursor to GitHub, to Slack, to Spotify, to Docker, to Notion, to all kinds of tools, right? So, and it basically brings together the infrastructure API through the MCP server and the AI assistant, which then can make use and sense of this, like I just showed you with the graphical type definitions as well. And so together, it brings me an enhanced developer experience, because I can basically feed information from my current project into the MCP server for, I can create a pull request, or I can basically review something, or I can do a diff of code that I have locally with code that exists somewhere else. I can do pull data from MCP servers and have it generate end files, create databases for me, and so on, right? So there's a lot of things that I can do by bringing these Lego blocks together as such. And similarly, the architecture looks very similar to what we've seen before, only that now the MCP host is not an AI assistant like Claude or Copilot or Agent Space from Google, but it's something like VS Code, Cursor, Windsurf, or similar tools as such, right? So again, it has an MCP server. In this case, we have a server that wraps the Aura API for Neo4j cloud service, and then basically accesses the API behind the scenes. But we handle basically the authentication on this level, and then it basically generates a token for API usage based on our client ID and client secret as such. Okay, so what does the Aura API look like? The Aura API is just a REST API, as you would have thousands of other REST APIs for managing infrastructure or other things as well. And it's also documented. So if you're interested in this, we'll share some links later on, or you can just follow this link on the slide as such. And then if I want to use this, it would look like this. But of course, I want to show it to you live. So let's switch over to Cursor. And you see that I have, as one of my MCP servers, I have the Neo4j Aura cloud service added here. And you see all these tools like list instances, get instant details, create instance, pause instance, resume instance, and so on. So I can basically make use of that. So list my Aura instances. So I basically, I'm in Composer, and Composer is able to access MCP tools. And then it asks me first, do I want to run this tool? And if I do this, then it basically gets responses from this and renders it in detail. It also gets a little bit more detail for each of these instances. So I, for instance, wrote an MCP tool here in the server that takes a number of IDs, of instance IDs, and then returns details for all of them. So it doesn't have to do N calls, but it does like individual calls as such. And now we can basically say, I want to see this list as a chart grouped by memory usage. So it's basically too much detail for me, and I just want to get an overview, and it gives me like an overview over the instances that are running here, right? So, and then I can basically get this. Can you add the current instance state as a, I can. So it basically gives me like also instance data and other things as well. I could also say, give me other information as well. Okay, let's create a new instance. Create a new Aura Pro instance. I don't even have to spell correctly, right? So that's also one of the drawbacks of LLMs that if fix your spelling. With 2 GB named MCP demo on GCP. Right, so it will basically take my slightly misspelled information. First gets my tenant ID for my tenants that I'm using. It uses my Michael's test tenant because it sounds like a test tenant environment, right? And then it will run create instance and create a Neo4j instance. You see here, this is basically the name that's get passed in, type, memory, GCP, region, and then it created this instance, and you see it even shows me the password, which we'll drop the instance later. But can you create a neo4j.env file for this instance with Neo4j URI, Neo4j password entries. All right, so we basically, because I'm a developer, I want to have an end file with this information, and it basically generates an end file with this information. All right, so I can basically save this now in my project and use it as an end file. Okay, drop the instance, MCP demo again. All right. So I can also delete the instance again, which is basically this, and it also deletes the file as part of this, right? So this was my piece of infrastructure services, but you can imagine that I can combine different infrastructure services. So I can also basically use this to deploy my application to Cloud Run or to AWS or as a Lambda or whatever, right? So because I can spin up Cloudflare workers and so on, right? So it's really nice in terms of like, I don't have to leave my IDE, or these MCP servers for the different APIs are available. I have authenticated against them. Then I can basically make use of that as well. And the third thing that I wanted to show is how would I make of MCP tools and Agent SDKs. So again, the layout of the architecture looks very similar, only that now I have generic MCP servers, right? So depending on what I want to use, I have generic MCP servers that gives me different tools, resources, and prompts, and I integrate this into my agent development kit in this case, but it could also be LangGraph or Graph or other tools. All of them added support for MCP wrappers, which basically take an MCP server and make all the tools of the MCP server available, or a subset of the tools available as the tools to whatever agent system is running inside of the orchestration framework. And then in my case for ADK, it's Gemini, but it could also be Claude or OpenAI or Bedrock Nova models that I use here, or any other Llama model as well, of course. Right, and this is actually code needed, so it's actually pretty minimal. So in ADK, you have something called MCP toolset, and the MCP toolset you connect either with SSE server params, so server sent event for hosted servers, or you use standard IO server params for standard IO servers. And then whatever tools the server offers is available as a toolset. You load the tools, and then these tools are available. And so I just call this load tools method that I created here with this MCP URL, and I add my get schema tool that I have as a passing function to the set of tools, and then I define my agent where this list of tools is just passed in as tools here, right? And then this agent can go ahead and be part of a multi-agent system, for instance, as such. And with MCP Toolbox for databases, this is also something that we integrated Neo4j in. It's also coming from Google, and we worked with the team to integrate Neo4j into this. And this is actually a really nice tool to allow you to get access to other databases. So let me show you in real what this looks like. I'll just switch to this notebook. First of all, I launched MCP Toolbox here as an hosted MCP server. So you see basically this is an SSE endpoint for the MCP server. You see it's called MCP here, the endpoint. And now I can make use of this. So if I wanted to, I can also pull it into Inspector and use this there. But the Google ADK has basically, so we've also written an article about this, like here. what I wanted to show you is, so the ADK has MCP tool integration, and it shows you basically in the docs how to do this, basically what I just showed you as well. Yeah, MCP tool set, and then the parameters to pull in this information. In our notebook, we see basically we have this example graph, which is a company's knowledge graph, where we have different companies, people that work there, industries, articles about these companies, and so on. And I have a number of agents that make use of different tools. So first, my tools were like connecting to Neo4j and executing queries without MCP, just to demonstrate what this looks like. And that's my basic database, graph database agent with some descriptions, and then it has basically read query and get schema. Then I have an investment research agent, which also has this get investors Python function that I have here, that I wrote here. And as the third thing, I integrated the MCP as this, the MCP server for Toolbox, but it could be any other MCP server here that's hosted or non-hosted, but in Google or in a notebook, it's much nicer to have a hosted server, of course, because starting another process in the Jupyter environment is always a little bit more tricky. And we have all these tools available that I configured in MCP Toolbox. And then just the code that I showed you, we load the tools via MCP tools and make them available. And then we have our agent here that takes this information here and then makes this available. And then we can basically run an agent loop and ask questions and get the information from the agent system, depending on where we are as such, right? And the tools that are configured here are basically tool definitions that are in a YAML file, where each of the tools is basically a Cypher query. For other databases, these would be SQL queries or HTTP requests as well. So it basically handles all the database connection handling and retries, external parameter authentication, and so on. And we just have to define our tools as YAML file, and then we can make use of this as such. So that's something else, but we could have also integrated any other MCP server here, right? So imagine I had a server that gave me access to earning calls, for instance, for companies. Then I could also have integrated this as an MCP server as well, and then have an agent, either one of the existing agent or a new agent that has more understanding of earning calls, and then kind of use an LLM to drill down into these earning calls for my investment research agent as well. Okay, and with this, I can hand back to Zach.
I could take it, but I think you're probably more of the expert on some of these challenges. So maybe I'll let you take this.
Okay, then I'll,
yeah.
Cool, then I'll, cool. So while MCP is super exciting and very interesting and broadly adopted, you've seen the number of companies that support it, and also the number of people that are writing MCP servers. It's still a very young protocol, right? So it was just launched in November. The main uptake started from January, and there's still a lot of open questions, especially if you want to use MCP in the enterprise. So let's start on the top here. One is discovery and package management. We have a number of registries, of course, but right now most of them don't support like signatures, trusted packages, versioning, different languages, and so on. So it's basically still very much, okay, you get an MCP server from someone that you need to trust, basically, and then install it or access it and ensure that it's not changing behind the scenes while you're using it and so on. So right now I would use it more for development life cycles and prototyping, or you install servers that you trust yourself into your own infrastructure where you have the source code available. You can look at the source, you see what it does, and then you run it locally. But that's currently the state of things for discovery and package management. Security, Zach already mentioned this as a question as well. So the Spec recently added OAuth flows for hosted servers as such. But there's still open questions on how do I pass in to the MCP server certain information from the outside that's not part of the LLM request, but that I want to pass on a side channel, for instance. How is basically IDP managed separate from resource authentication? what is like security, encryption of information during transport and other things. There's quite a number of open questions still in this. Deployment, most MCP servers today that you've seen in these registries are local server that are basically launched locally by the MCP host, which of course doesn't work so well in cloud environments. So you actually want to have hosted servers, which then also require an auth flow and so on. There's how do I run it in my VPC? What kind of network access? How can I limit tools? How can I ensure that basically servers can be upgraded and updated while the agent system is running and things like that as well, right? So versioning, multi-version rollouts, and all these typical deployment questions as well. Another question is statefulness, which is basically the creators of the MCP protocol thought that stateful connections are a good thing to have between the assistant and the MCP server, but we all know that stateful connections are not really scalable in internet scale use cases. So that's something that I think in the future, most MCP servers actually are stateless servers where the state is actually handled in the client. And because, the LLM with the user or the agent context has all this client-side context, or on a server, on a database, but not really in the MCP server, right? So because you want them to be scalable proxies, more or less, right? And then the different MCP hosts have different levels of support. So for instance, Claude Desktop only supports local MCP servers. Others like Cursor and VS Code also support hosted servers, but then not all the most recent Spec editions and so on. So that's also something that will need to sort itself out over the next few months. But as now all the big cloud providers and companies are contributing to the MCP protocol, I think most of these things are moving pretty quickly. And in a few weeks, we'll see already some good progress there as such. And with that, we can look at a little bit at what we talked about today. So we talked about MCP as a standard protocol that solves the many-to-many challenge for integrating tools with AI architectures. We manage the connection from the client-side agent or AI assistant to the MCP tools. It's composable because these are like Lego blocks that I can pull in. And the protocol has been designed in a way that it's easy to implement on the server side. So we've seen a massive uptake and lots of MCP servers being developed. And we also discussed a little bit just now of the challenges as such. What's from our side fundamental is, first of all, it's really good to use MCP servers for data services. So you can give agents or tools or clients access to your data. You can also have, if you trust them, take actions. So for instance, you can send up updates or flag certain information or other things as well. For infrastructure APIs, which is especially interesting for developers, because then from the comfort of your AI-assisted IDE, you can basically take actions in infrastructure. You can take information from the infrastructure, integrate it into your code, and so on. And if you build agent systems or multi-agent systems, then today all the open source tools have MCP integration as well. So you can take existing MCP tooling and make it available as tools in your agent systems. And if you want to dive deeper or learn more, please take a snapshot of these QR codes or follow the links of the tools that we sent out. And hopefully this was quite helpful for you.
Yes, I know we moved through a lot of information in a very short amount of time. But these resources over here, if you follow them, they'll help you get started with these 3 different things. So the Getting Started blog is great for going over data services and infrastructure APIs. What Michael was showing you with MCP Toolbox and ADK, so like writing code with MCP for this 3rd step is there. And we have a developer guide as well that kind of combines all these resources together. And then also there's some Graph Academy, sort of free open source, kind of like online paced training. So if you want to, how do I load my data into Neo4j, right? To get started with some of this stuff, maybe you want to try on your own data. Those resources will help you get that accomplished. And with that, I think we're ready to wrap up. So
Yeah.
Cool.
And we're back. So
Yeah.
thank you,
It's
Michael,
really a
of the
lot of
past
content.
and Zach.
It's really a lot of content. I have to.
It was a
agree
lot.
with
It was
Zach.
a lot. Yeah.
But you can rewatch the live stream, right? Because live stream is also being recorded, so you can rewatch
Exactly.
it and pause it
Yeah.
and try things as well. So that's good. And yeah, and we also got a lot of really good questions in the chat, so we can probably go through them.
Yeah.
If you want
Yeah.
to.
Exactly.
I mean, we have a few more minutes, I think, right? So and then
Yeah. No, we can do those.
do it.
Shall we start with
Super.
Adam's question?
What was the first question actually?
The question I
Let's
think was
see.
from Adam, and he asks, what are your opinions about the choice of transport type? I see people are using stdio a lot rather than SSE. Are these specific scenarios where you shouldn't use stdio? And then I think Yuri commented that SEE transport is now deprecated. So
Okay, let's talk about transports a little bit. Good point. If you want to, you can also pull them up as such. So let me just quickly share my screen so I can show some things as well. 1 second. Okay. Yes. So one reason I think why the standard IO transport was at least initially, or is right now still the most popular transport, because it's really easy to write in standard IO server because it's just running locally. There was also a later question how you usually download these MCP servers. So in most tools, actually, people I can actually, because there was also the question on how to set it up in Cursor. So in Cursor, when you say I add a new MCP server, you can basically configure the type. Either you have the command, which is kind of the local standard IO server, where you pass in the command to run, right? So for instance, here, if I have, let's see, I don't know if I had here one. These are all, no, this is actually a local one. So this actually runs UVX. So you can basically run these, many of the MCP servers actually are hosted either on PyPy as a registry or npm as a registry. So people publish them. So they have also, fortunately, a version and so on. And UVX or npx basically download and run things. And if it's already downloaded, they just run it as well. So that's actually quite, or pipx, quite nice. So you don't have to download manually and then run it, but it does it all in one go, which is really nice. Some of the registries also support this. Docker has now also a way of running MCP servers locally that they wrap into a container as well, which basically then is just a Docker command. And with Docker Desktop, there's a local way of doing this. And the reason why standard IO servers were most popular was actually that Cloud Desktop does only support standard IO. So in Cloud Desktop, if you, 1 second, if I open my Cloud Desktop tool here, 1 second, here. I was playing around with stuff, so that's why I have this debug message here. By the way, if you're debugging and working on Cloud Desktop, there's a really good open MCP log files thing here that you can open MCP log files, and then you can basically go to this folder where it has, for each server, it has actually different log files. So if something goes wrong, you can actually see what happened with the server, what kind of interactions happened there. So that's actually quite nice. Just as a side note. And then in Claude, actually in the config, Claude config, which is basically for MCP is just a JSON file, you basically configure the tools like this, and it's basically in the JSON. You have then the command is UVX, arguments is this, and then the options are basically environment variables or parameters or whatever such. Right? And so that's how you configure the local servers, and the remote servers. You configure them basically as a URL as such, right? So you have an SSE URL as I showed here in for Cloud Run for the toolbox, where you basically have then an MCP URL that's listed here. And the comment on SSE being deprecated was an interesting one. Actually, I checked it out. In the spec documentation right now, it does not say that SSE is deprecated yet. there were a bunch of security issues with SSE as remote server. The MCP folks now came up with a new protocol that's called streaming HTTP, which is just a kind of WebSocket, similar to WebSocket wrapper around SSE basically, or like event types, which would have to implement or use the packages for doing this. SSE was because they wanted to have basically streaming and bidirectional things. No one really knows why they didn't use WebSockets, to be honest, but that's a question for them more. Right. So, but right now they have some security comments on SSE, but does not say that it's deprecated on the docs. But it could be that in the spec they already deprecated it as well. Right. So they basically have the base protocol and then basically architecture, and I think here is they discuss the transports as well, right? So, and yeah, that's the reason. But I think going forward, we will see more and more hosted servers. But of course, there were also some questions around this. With hosted servers, you have to have an auth flow, right? So, and talking about permissions and so on, because there was also a question about permissions. How do you configure an MCP server in a way that only certain access is possible? So if you go back to our Claude example here, you basically need to configure the server either locally, like I did here with this temporary Aura database that's already gone now, I think at least. That was just a test database, where basically the server is configured in a way that it basically takes these credentials and then authenticates against the backend system, and then has exactly these permissions that these credentials give you access to as such. Or if you have an infrastructure service, then you would put in here client secret, client ID as environment variables as such. And then, so that controls access. There's also some other ways. So for instance, MCP Toolbox has something which I find really interesting, which has a kind of a side channel where they pass not this kind of information through the LLM, but on a side channel. So in the configuration of the server, basically, there's a side channel for the authenticated user, which is passed as a separate parameter, which you then can use in your tools, basically accessing the HTTP header or the header, and then use the information in that header to restrict access. So for instance, if you have something like database tools, you can add additional where clauses that restrict access to a certain user, for instance, as well, right? If that user is not a database user, but it's an application user, how many applications are built, then you can use this as part of your tools. And of course, then like in every application, you have to basically take care of proper isolation of your users using user IDs or other permission systems as such. And there's also some MCP hosts which support passing in instead of having environment variables here, or config options that you can also pass in HTTP headers for remote servers. So where in the HTTP header, basically you provide the configuration or the auth token to get this. But ideally, what you want is a full end-to-end auth flow, which, for instance, GitHub's MCP server does. So GitHub is one of the few public hosted MCP servers now. GitHub hosted MCP server, which is basically then, if you add it, it's basically going through the whole regular GitHub auth flow. So you go to GitHub, you authenticate with GitHub, and then after you authenticated in that session, basically your permission is your user's permission as such from that auth flow, right? And or you can provide a personal access token, which is then the local environment as well, right? So they have both options here. And for using remote servers in Cloud Desktop, if you want to do this, there's a bunch of tools that do proxying, and I have been using one that worked well for me at least, which is called, which is called MCP Proxy. So it's a Python package. Let's see, PyPy, MCP Proxy. And this one works actually quite nice. It also works in both directions, so it can make and standard I/O server and streamable remote server, and also the other way around. So it can also take a remote server and make it a local server as well. And so I had fewer issues on Claude for me with Python, so using pipx or UVX instead of npm. So I had an issue that Claude never found my proper node environment for some reason, and so I stuck with the Python side of things as such. So what other questions do we have?
Okay, I think you
Agent
in one
access.
go you kind of answered most of
Did I
these.
answer all of them? We talked about
There's one
cursor
question
config, SSA.
from Yusuf. He asks, can the agent access data that isn't authorized, or it isn't authorized to access, e.g. in a multi-vendor or SaaS context?
Yeah, that's what I just alluded to. It basically, whatever you pass as user credentials, it will be able to access the information that's available to your user, basically, right? The MCP server will use your user login to authenticate against the SaaS context, and then it has basically, it's acting in your stead as such, right? So, and that's basically sitting in the session, and then it can use that there. And then that's why I said also you should only use trusted servers. So don't take random MCP servers from the internet, right? So, but either use a server that's officially from a vendor where you trust the vendor, use an open source server where you can look at the code as well. Only use it in prototype test environments. Don't use an unknown server with your production database or your production SaaS environment as such, right? So, and I think in general, MCP is a super interesting concept and it has a lot of potential, but until all these security issues are handled, you need to either really just run it inside of a very isolated environment so that it can't get out of that environment and kind of is confined to that, or use it for prototyping and exploring things as such, right? So that's my recommendation as such. But it's because it's really like I mentioned before, it's like Lego blocks, right? So you basically have all these kind of different tools, and like output from one tool can feed in the next tool, and then the output from that tool can feed in another tool, and the LLM can call a tool multiple times and can do drill downs. It can do sequence of calls. So like all the things that you usually would do manually with like copy and pasting data from A to B or something like that, you can do it with a conversation basically, and that's actually quite nice.
Cool.
Cool.
We have a couple more non-MCP related questions, which I like to take the opportunity to say we are going to be in our Discord server after this to answer a couple more questions or to chat with you guys. So if you specifically looking at the question from Mario about graphrag, LLM agents, or Daniel's questions here from natural language integrating or working with Neo4j with natural language, jump over to our Discord if you like, and we will be there in a little bit as well, and then we can maybe take those questions there.
And we have actually what we also want to do is because
yes,
we
yeah, exactly. So we will continue the MCP journey in June. There is
exactly.
I think the registration page is not up yet, but on 10th of June you will get another webinar. So if you go to neo4j.com/events and filter for webinars, you should see soon the session to be up there on
exactly
more in
because everything is moving so quickly, right? So
exactly.
everything is moving so quickly, and then that's why we want to basically be able to not wait too long until to share this information.
Exactly.
And that's why we thought we do a live stream first and then do a webinar in a month's time, where we can also talk about and host it Neo4j server actually. So which we're currently working on,
talk about the
and I'm super
progress
excited. Exactly, super excited to show that off then.
Yeah, that will be great. Until then, a couple of things will be happening, of course. So next Thursday, so in a week from now, we will have the next Going Meta episode. It's a bit of a shift of timing because it was too many things happening at the same time. So that's why it's not the usual slot. But hopefully you can make that join us then on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitch, as well as everywhere else we are streaming live. Also, Michael and I will be back on the 26th of May for our Discover Neo4j Aura DB series. So that's the Monday in 2 weeks' time, and maybe we also talk a little bit about MCP there. We'll see how what's up. So we'll
so many
showcase
new things that are out there.
interesting.
So it will be
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
What I wanted to also mention to you is notes. The call for papers is still open. So if you want to submit an interesting talk, maybe you are currently working with MCP and graphs, then definitely submit that. If you work with something else in graphs, also submit that. We like to hear stories, like to hear your presentations at Notes, which is taking place in November, but you have another month basically for your sessions. All themes, all kind of topics go, as long as they are related to graphs, obviously. So we're happy to have you. It's a fun event, full of knowledge sharing, full of best practices around graph databases, AI, graphrag, knowledge graphs, all these topics, and I'm sure MCP will also play a big role in November. So yeah, please submit and let us hear from you. Let us have you live on stage at Notes. And I think Zach also mentioned this. There is a couple of also resources. You've seen the QR codes. This is another one that links to our developer pages, where we have lots of informative articles and guides. Michael recently posted a huge segment on MCP as well there. So if you're interested in what's up with that, check out our guides there. There is also Graph Academy for if you want to learn Neo4j basically starting, but also working with LLMs, working with an AI, and combining this. Also, lots of things on knowledge graph. So if you are interested in self-paced online courses, and they are all free, definitely give it a look and check it out. And be part of the community. Like now, if you are a member of the Discord server, jump to the watch party channel where we will be in a moment. If you are on a community forum, hang out, ask questions, comment on things. So it's a very friendly and vibrant place. So hope to see you there. And thank you very much, Michael, to you for spending the time today, for the demos, and for the great presentation. And thank you in absence to Zach, obviously, also for preparing the very, very heavy content bit today.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a lot of fun, and I'm really super excited about all your questions and all the interactions. If you have more questions, bring them on. As I said, you can drop me an email if you want to deep dive into a use case. We've already seen some customers using MCP to interact with their knowledge graphs, which is super fascinating as well from a more business domain perspective. So let us know how it goes, and otherwise feel free to ask questions on Discord or the forums as well. Happy to answer them. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Have a good day.
Bye.